Since I'm very jet lagged, why don't I just tell you about the single greatest lesson I've learned in my 40 years on this planet Earth. So when I was growing up, and like most kids, I was taught right and wrong, good and bad. And as a result, I learned to see the world in those lights. Everything is good and bad, right and wrong. And this value judgment is based on what other people that I looked up to, I respected, I trusted, told me. For example, my parents in the beginning phase of my life. Later on in school, my teachers, my professors, my friends, and eventually when I joined the workforce, my bosses, and those people who either I loved or cared about, or those who held authorities over me. It wasn't until I broke out on my own to do my own business and to really travel around the world that I started to acquire a different way of looking at things. Not through the lenses of right and wrong, which very much is a value judgment, but through the lens of self-interest. Because as I came into contact with different cultures, different people, different way of doing things, I realized that right and wrong is very relative of the culture. In America, carrying a gun is the right thing, but in China, carrying a gun is the wrong thing. In the Western world, telling a woman how many children they can have is the wrong thing. But in China, it is the right thing. Now, there are so many examples I've seen. I've seen Arabic world, how people pray 5 times a day, how they fast, how they don't eat things, such as pork. But in other parts of the world, bacon is loved by everyone. I mean, these examples are just, I can think of so many of them. How to dress, how to talk, how to sit, what to drink, what not to drink, what to say, what not to say, how should you wear your hair, how should you wear your clothes, what side of the road you should drive on. The differences are innumerable. But ultimately, everyone just lived. Everyone lived based on the way they were taught and what they can figure out is the best way in their part of the world, in their region, in their situation. And no one's particularly right. No one's particularly wrong. They just figured out, okay, this works for me and I'm going to stick with it, right? And because I come to realize that there is no right and wrong in the absolute term. But there is right and wrong in the relative term, but not in the absolute term. Then I had to find another way to gauge how to relate myself to the rest of the world, how to make decisions, how to reach a correct, think about things the correct way in order to have good results, right? And what I come to realize is that there is one value system that is absolute, that is not relative to culture, between one culture to another. And that system is called self-interest. Because I've traveled almost 80 countries now, and lived in about 8 or 9 countries long term. And what I've seen is that every person in every country operate in the same way, in the sense that they're self-interested. They want to take care of themselves. They want to take care of the people they care about, the family, the friends they love. They want to care about the things that they value. Hence, how they see the world is simply an extension of their value system. And everyone has their own little value system within a country. And every country has their own spectrum of value system. So for example, a French value system will be different from an American one, will be different from a Chinese one or Indian one. But the French one, because they're a Western society, their value system will be more closely aligned, let's say, to a European, to a US system, because they're European rooted and they're Caucasian, than let's say a Japanese one or Indonesian one. So even with the value systems, there are spectrums, right? And depending on where you fall on the spectrum, you can quickly figure out what someone is how they see the world, the value system. It's basically how they see the world, right? But from that, you can deduce what matters to them, what their self-interests are, what they care about. For example, in the Western world, they care about nature. They care about ecosystem. At least many state that they do care about. But if you look at their way of living, especially in the U.S. And other countries, they drive big cars, right? They waste a lot of things. But yet they manifestly they state that they care about the ecosystem. Where in Asia, people don't really care per se in the ecosystem, and not as much as the West manifestly do. But people in Asia live in a much more sustainable manner than the Europeans or the Americans. So why is that? Well, it's based on self-interest, right? So once you reach a certain economic affluence, you're no longer struggling to get by. You care about your surrounding environment. Hence, rich people's neighborhood looks much better than poor people's neighborhood. Right? They have already attained certain material affluence where their needs go beyond basic survival. They care about aesthetics. They care about all the other things besides feeding their own bellies. And that is across culture. That is universally applied. So when I realized this, self-interest system is a much better way of contemplating the world, about the world, to make judgment, to make decision, to understand how the world works. I cast away this right and wrong, good or bad ideas. And you see in many of my videos, it's about that. How I see the world is maybe a little bit different from mainstream media. And the reason for that is because I realize this right and wrong thing is a terrible way to approach how one should live. And also how one should judge other people and make decisions, and good decisions, right? Because making good decisions lead to good results, which lead to improving your lives. So I'll give you an example of good and bad versus right and wrong, right? So in the Western media, when I watch it, and recently, it's about right and wrong, meaning that, okay, most recent example, Ukraine. In the Western media, and most people in the West would think that, oh, it's wrong, what Russia does is wrong. Why? Because they are invading a country, they are killing people, they're taking away people's freedom of self-determination. But let's flip to my system. My system is self-interest. Then in my worldview, I see Russia is promoting their self-interest or protecting their self-interest. And the Europeans and the Americans are also doing the same thing. Neither side is right or wrong. They're doing both pursuing their own self-interest. It just so happened that their self-interests collide at this point in time and in that part of the world. Same thing with China and the US, right? You see people bickering about who's right? Is the US right or China right? Who's doing the right thing for the world, for people? But I don't see it that way. I see it as both countries are pursuing their best interests. And their interest is promoting their own culture, promoting their own economy, promoting their own influence, right? So the two systems clashes at this point in history. Not 30 years ago, and probably not 30 years hence. But today, in this point in time, both countries doing their best based on their understanding of the world, based on their perspective, based on their capabilities, and the resource they have access to pursue their own self-interest, which is expanding, right? And that's normal. So when I see the world in those lights, I no longer judge people so much as trying to understand them, because when you see things world in the good and bad, all you do is making judgment calls. And that judgment call is inaccurate because based on your narrow definition of good and bad, which is influenced by your cultural, family, racial, blah, 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 bias. But if you judge the world based on self-interest, the first thing you have to do is understand what the other side's interests are, what their interests are. If you don't understand that, how can you make actions? How do you base your judgment? So then, instead of judging, you're learning, right? Or I'm learning. I'm trying to understand what the other side want. what they're going after. And often once you understand that it's not in conflict with what you want. Actually, you guys, both sides want the same thing. It's just the approach to that self-interest is done differently, right? And then a lot of the conflicts melt away, disappears. So this is my singular greatest lesson I've learned in the 40 years that I spent on this planet. Is unlearning to see the world in black and white, in good and bad, in right and wrong. And relearning to see the world in self-interest, like a baby. And I think because that I've achieved a level of success that is beyond my means, my social class, my background. And perhaps if you can unlearn seeing the world in good and bad and relearn the world in self-interest, seeing things in self-interest, you may achieve same result, even better result than I have done in my life. Good luck. Bye-bye.